Welcome back to a bit Gamey, and the new series that I'm calling Mars, which stands for Messing About with Rules and Scenarios. The sequence on this started out with me planning to do Ancients and Napoleonics, and then realising that large pipe blocks and large French attack columns weren't really suited to a small table. So I switched to thinking about periods of history which were restricted to line and march column, no big pipe blocks and no big attack column. So you could have small units representing those formations. And so I hitched on early to high medieval. So that's before the Renaissance and the coming of the lanzknechts and Swiss pikemen, all the way up through pike and shot as one candidate, and the horse and musket period after pike and shot but before Napoleonics, so roughly the 1700s. So once I decided on the periods, I had to decide on the rules, and I got the black powder and the supplement for the 1700s called Last Argument of Kings, but then I thought they might be a bit too involved for a small table. So I stepped back and decided to use the horse and musket section of One-Hour Wargames. I use that as a basis and then add and modify it to include things that I think give more kind of historical flavour from either from reading history or from reading other rule books like the black powder ones or whichever other ones I get my hands on. So that's what this first Mars video is about. It's about going through the One-Hour Wargames horse and musket rules and modifying them in ways that I think fits the period, and then using that as a basis for the rules for going forward, to be further changed as and when I kind of come up with ideas from either from history or from other wargames rules of this period. A quick caveat is I'm not a great expert on this period. I know a bit about Ancients and World War II and Napoleonics, but this era in the 1700s is a bit of a blank spot. So I'm not going to claim to be 100% accurate, although it's intended to be. So the first section out of the One-Hour Wargames rules is unit selection. There are a bunch of tables for 6 units, 4 units or 3 units, where you roll a dice on the table and you get a selection from your unit list. Now the thing about the selections for the horse and musket era, I think it's more tied towards Napoleonic than earlier, because it goes, you can have up to 4 line infantry, 2 light infantry, 2 cavalry and 2 batteries, and you get a random selection from that according to the die roll. But according to my reading, light infantry is a thing. It kind of existed, but it wasn't really a thing until around the 7 Years' War. And in my case, looking at the War of Spanish Succession, light infantry aren't really a thing. So I'm going to change that to the category of 2 light infantry. I'm going to change it to 2 special battalions, and the special can vary over time. But in this early period, I'm going to make the special list to be 1 grenadier, 1 guards battalion and 1 grenadier battalion. So basically, when you roll on the table and it says 1 light infantry, then you roll again to see if it's guards or grenadiers, and if it's 2, then you get both, 1 guard and 1 grenadier. Guards will just be an elite version of line infantry with certain advantages, and the grenadiers will be line infantry but with a bonus for attacking fortifications. For attacking fortified villages and field fortifications. So that's the only change there on the selection. As As an aside on the unit selection question, I noticed when reading up on the various battles in this period that the armies were often listed as, in terms of battalions, squadrons, and guns. So you might get a battle that's listed as 120 battalions, 120 squadrons, and 120 guns, which is quite interesting. If you say, for example, that a cavalry regiment was generally, say, three squadrons, and artillery battery was generally six guns, for example, then the ratio becomes 6 battalions, 2 regiments of 3 squadrons, and 1 battery of 6 guns. So the ratio is like 6 to, the ratio in terms of units is like 6, 2, and 1. So it's quite interesting how close that is to the One-Hour Wargames ratio. I mean, it's not the same in every battle, of course, but it does seem to average around that kind of level. Six battalions, 2 cavalry regiments, and 1 battery. So the first section is movement. There's various rules about what kind of terrain you can get into and turning and stuff like that, and I'm going to leave most of it alone and just change a few little bits that I think are appropriate. Like for the infantry, they say in the One-Hour Wargames rules, they get a 6-inch move, and I'm going to change that to be 4 inches in line and 8 inches in column, and taking taking half a turn to switch between the two forms. That's mostly for flavour, really. The second category is artillery, and although they had light guns in this period, battalion guns like 3-pounders, and Swedish had what they called leather guns, generally speaking they don't seem to be that effective. So in my take, in the sequence of gunpowder artillery, they start off as a siege weapon and very immobile and relatively ineffective against as field artillery. And then gradually over time they get more mobile and more effective. But in this time period, the Spanish succession, they're still pretty clunky. So they're they're at the point now where they're effective but immobile, or relatively immobile. They did have light guns at this time. Battalion guns, and the Swedes had leather guns. But as far as I can tell, they weren't particularly effective yet. They would become so later on, but they weren't quite. The light guns weren't really effective yet, and the heavy guns were fairly immobile. So I'm giving the artillery in my rules as 8 inches on roads and 4 inches elsewhere, and with 1 turn to shift between limbered and unlimbered. Again, this is partly flavour, and I may change it later if it doesn't work out. The third category is cavalry, and in the original rules it's 12-inch. They get a 12-inch move, and for me, I have an issue with cavalry generally, and how it's represented in games and in movies. Where they charge, it's charging around everywhere for all the time, basically. When you read the historical stuff, there's cavalry has to be conserved. So the horse stamina has to be conserved, and they get blown out quite fast. So in a charge, they generally start as a walk and then gradually build up and only charge in the last 50 yards or whatever. So I'm thinking of my version. I think I'm going to basically give them, the cavalry, a kind of the same move as the infantry. 4 inches in line, 8 inches in column, but they have a kind of bonus move as well. If they end up within charge range, then they get the kind of bonus move to actually charge. So most of the time, just like in horse racing or whatever, you see these horses charging around the track, but that's with no weight. You've got these tiny little guys being the jockeys. Some giant, big cuirassier full of armor and weapons and stuff. So they just can't do it with a heavy weight on the back, unless it's done in a kind of a very controlled sort of way. And he reads various stories about if they charge too fast, rather situations like where a cavalry regiment has charged too soon, and so the people receiving the charge can see it and know that they're going to be exhausted by the time they get to the enemy. And the other thing that kind of gets me about the kind of cavalry charges in history is the way that with chess, apparently it's not based on military, but influenced by it, and the knight's move in chess, in that kind of weird diagonal thing. It's almost like to me anyway, it's more or less a kind of indication of this fact that cavalry has to be. It can be very fast, but you have to conserve it until the point where you need to be very fast, and the rest of the time you're just trotting around. So I don't know if that's 100% correct, but I think that's where I'm going at the minute. I have a fairly bland basic move, but with a charge move if they end their move within charge range and in the right direction, then they get a kind of bonus move on top. And the last thing to change on the movement is I'm going to have a general, and the idea will be a unit within 12 inches of the general can move on a 4+, but a unit outside that range can only move on an 8+. I'll have to experiment with that to see how it works out, but that's the start point, because I want to have some kind of command and control element. The next section is shooting, and in the One-Hour Wargames rules, they give each unit hit points, 15 hit points, and then the shooting does like a d6 casualties, or d6 -2, or d6 +2. So a range of between 1 and 5ish. So 15 hit points, and each shot gives you between 1 and 5 hit points. So roughly 3 and a bit hits. But I don't want to have any kind of record keeping. I want to get it all visually represented on the table. So I'm thinking of I've already done it. I've put the figures on the command base is all glued in, but the other ones are loose. Take off as casualties, and so I'll do it as say 4 casualties, and the regular units will run away. Guards can take six casualties. I like looking at units like you can tell that they've been damaged. But anyway, so instead of their thing of rolling a dice and adding a -2 or whatever, I'm going to do it. I don't know the exact numbers yet, or I've got my guess numbers, and we'll experiment to see if that works. So the rule is going to be infantry need to roll an 8+, and if they get +4, it gives an extra one. So if they roll a 12, it would be 2 casualties. 8+ would give 1 casualty. 12 would give 2, and then the guards get a +2. Generally, I don't know if that's quite right, because they're not necessarily better shots, but because they're calmer, they're more likely to be pick the right time to shoot, sort of thing. Another thing is the idea of first shot is the idea that before the battle is the time they kind of they load the muskets properly, where they have plenty of time to do it and not make mistakes. But after the first shot, there's it all goes a bit crazy, and as well as all the smoke, you've got there's not loading things properly, out of general panic and stuff. So like I said, the infantry to hit is going to be 8+, with +2 for the first shot and +2 for guards. That's the general rule for that. Artillery, I'm not entirely sure yet either, but I'm going to go for the time being. I'm going to go for 8+ in the middle. Well, yeah. First of all, is range. In the One-Hour Wargames rules, the infantry have a range of 12 inches, which seems too far for me. I mean, it might be practical. I might go back to it, but I'm initially going to talk about sort of 6 inches or 4 inches. It's going to be quite close, basically. And artillery is going to have a short range where you can use canister, medium range, and long. So breaking it down into 8-inch blocks. They'll have 8 inches for canister, 16 above that. So up to 24 will be medium, and beyond 24 is long. I'll give them, say, again, 8+ at medium, 10+ at long, and 4+ at canister range. And again, so like if you're 4+ and you get 8, then you hit 2. So that's it. It's all very rough at the moment, but that's a general plan, and I'll try it out, see what's what. Next up is melee combat, and in the One-Hour Wargames rules, it's just cavalry does that. But I'm changing that. From my reading, infantry melee is actually quite rare. Either the unit that's supposed to charge wouldn't charge, or they did charge and then the defending unit ran away. So it's more of a psychological attack. The exception being if they're defending a fortified village or a fortified line of some kind, in which case there's they felt there's less of a threat, or the attackers generally couldn't see a big mass of bayonets. They just saw a bunch of heads above a parapet, which was less scary. And obviously, if in the fortified place, they obviously got the advantage. So definitely want to have that simulated in it, and I'm not entirely sure what I'm going to do yet, but it's going to be something like both sides roll a couple of dice, and the one with the least casualties gets a bonus, grenadiers get a bonus, and guards get a bonus, something like that. I'll have to experiment. So that's the first thing there, and then obviously you have to decide on the casualties. So if it could be like, again, just roll dice each, and whoever wins with those same bonuses knocks the casualty off the other person. And then if the attacker loses the roll, then nothing happens. Basically, they didn't charge. And if they win, they take or you could do it by how much they win by, but they take one casualty off the defender, and then the defender retreats. That's it in the open. And maybe have an additional thing if they win by +4, they get 2 casualties. +8, they get 3. Blah blah blah. So that's the possibility there. And if they're attacking a fortified village or something, then if the attackers lose, they take a casualty and don't. They basically stay in the same spot, simulating they attacked and pushed back by fire. So yeah, so attacking the fortified village, if they lose, they take a casualty and stay where they are. And if they win, they bounce back, but they take a casualty off to the defenders. So basically, you can't take a fortified village in one go. You have to keep winning you have to keep winning the melees until the defender runs away. So that's just again for further experiment. So that was the infantry, and cavalry in this period is kind of weird transition phase, because after hundreds of years of pike and shot, where cavalry got into the habit of not directly charging pikes, and they were still kind of in this stage at this point. The cavalry was generally to fight other cavalry, and maybe take the infantry in the flank if they were pinned. But they didn't successfully charge forward infantry, consistently. I mean, it could happen, but they needed to charge an infantry that was pinned already in the front, like they're fighting or shooting at somebody else. And they could get them in the flank. That's my take anyway. So cavalry charges I'm going to make do differently than infantry, in that they assume that cavalry will charge. If the cavalry moves, ends their move within charge range, they can charge. But the way it will work will be the infantry get a defensive shot, and if it's enough, if they get a casualty, the cavalry just stop basically. And if they don't get a casualty, then the cavalry charge in. So I don't know if it would leave it at the same as 8+, or make it either 6+ or something, because to dissuade cavalry from charging. But that's going to be the basic gist. Is cavalry get into the charge move, they do a charge or order a charge, then the infantry shoot at them, and if they get a casualty, it stops the charge. And if it doesn't, then the cavalry will do some casualties, like on easier than normal, say 4+, say. So that'd be 4+ would be 1 casualty, 8, and they potentially get 8+ would be 2, blah blah blah, and then the cavalry will bounce off at the end. Unless, if the infantry is broken, then they pursue and basically wipe them out. But otherwise, they'll bounce off after that charge. So again, that's all up in the air. That's still experimental, but that's the general idea of the melee. So a quick recap of the changes to the rules. There's not having light infantry yet. Can bring them in the 7 Years' War, and instead have the category where you roll for light infantry, make that guards and grenadiers instead. Movement, change it so there's line and column, mostly for flavour really, and also to make the artillery less mobile. Shooting, shorter range for the infantry, make it much more like a kind of close sort of combat sort of thing. And instead of having the units having hit points and taking a number of hits on their hit points, and make it so you remove casualty figures. And if a standard regiment, standard battalion loses 4, they run away, and 6 if they're guards. That's shooting. And melee is a bunch of different categories. It's like infantry versus infantry in the open, and infantry versus infantry in fortifications, and also cavalry versus cavalry, and cavalry versus infantry. So that's a bunch of different cases for that. I'll also have a general for a little bit of command and control. I think that's it. Yeah, I'll write notes about the rule changes in the comments thing. Okay, so yes, that's basically it. It's my it's all experimental, and I'll change it if I need to. But I think that's it for now. Okay, to